Perfect neighbor, perfect lie. The title is the first lie. Perfect is not a description. It is a credential. It is the ego's way of saying, believe me first. And neighbor is not intimacy. It is proximity, the most fertile distance for projection, because it feels like knowing without requiring it. This story does not begin with a gunshot. It begins with a model of the world. In that model, ordinary life is interpreted as invasion. Children playing becomes trespassing. Noise becomes threat. A shared patch of grass becomes my property. And repeated calls to law enforcement become proof not of danger, but of righteousness. That is the machinery the film exposes. The ego's first move is credentials. One of the earliest tells is the line that seems irrelevant. I was going to buy the quad. Why say that to police? Because it is not information. It is positioning. It signals status. It implies authority. It quietly ranks human beings. Owner over renter. Investor over occupant. Stable over temporary. The point is simple. Credibility should be granted before facts are tested. The perfect neighbor identity is moral armor. Once it is worn, every complaint is framed as civic virtue. Fear is laundered into responsibility. The ego's second move is to build the paper trail. The calls keep coming, about nothing that ever becomes something. That repetition is not neutral. It does two things. First, it normalizes the caller's interpretation. Each visit from deputies says, without saying, this concern is legitimate enough to respond to. Second, it builds narrative infrastructure. When harm finally occurs, the story can be recited. I called, I reported, I tried, I was scared. The point is not to prevent violence. The point is to establish that violence will later look reasonable. A Course in Miracles names this clearly. The ego is always constructing justification. It does not want peace. It wants to be right, because right is how it proves it exists. Then comes the hinge moment. A shot fired through a closed door. That detail collapses the entire self-defense myth at the level of content. A closed door means no confirmed target. No confirmed target means the act is not a response to what is seen. It is a response to what is imagined. The bullet does not travel through wood alone. It travels through a mental image that has already been granted the status of reality. This is why the detective's question lands like a spiritual dagger disguised as procedure. Is it possible the threat was not said and was only heard? A Course in Miracles calls this the central error. Perception is not knowledge. The ego experiences its interpretations as facts. And once interpretations are treated as facts, fear becomes permission. The documentary delivers its most devastating correction with timestamps. The story of 10 minutes of terror becomes 2 minutes on the log. 2 minutes from the first call ending to the second call reporting a shot. The film does not need to shout after that. The time record does it. Because the 2 minutes reveal the real timeline. The decision was made long before the trigger was pulled. The trigger pull is merely the final bead on a string that has been sliding for months. This is inertia, not physics, psychology. A pattern continues until acted upon by an outside force. And in this neighborhood, the outside force was allowed to be a corpse. The most brutal part is not that law enforcement did not know. The brutal part is that prevention would have required naming what is socially uncomfortable to name. That repeated nuisance calls were not nuisance calls. They were escalation. They were surveillance. They were obsession dressed as concern. Systems often wait for undeniable harm because undeniable harm ends ambiguity. It also ends liability. It also ends argument. But that means the threshold for action becomes death. So the film exposes the sick logic. A life is treated as the cost of clarity. After the killing, relocation happens. The option that could have dissolved the situation in form was always available. That is not a technical detail. It is a confession of motivation. If leaving was possible, then trapped was never the issue. Control was the issue. A perfect neighbor is not someone seeking peace. It is someone seeking a world that obeys. Then comes the tablet and the invitation to write. The note appears fast, compact, almost rehearsed. An apology paired with a justification. "I'm sorry" is offered. "I was terrified" remains central. That is not repentance. It is the ego protecting its self-concept under consequence. True remorse faces what was done without bargaining for innocence. The ego cannot do that because the ego is made of innocence claims. So the letter becomes what the calls always were: narrative management. This film is not about a bad person versus good people. That framing is the same thought system that produced the violence. This is about what happens when identity is built on specialness and defended with fear. A Course in Miracles offers the simplest diagnosis. Projection makes perception, and perception, when treated as truth, becomes a weapon. The perfect neighbor is not a person, it is a concept. It is the belief that external order creates internal safety. But safety does not come from controlling grass, noise, bodies, or children. It comes from undoing the interpreter that calls life a threat. Until that interpreter is questioned, the world will keep producing the same pattern in different costumes. And it will keep calling it an isolated incident.